Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Dr. India White's session, Grit in the Math Classroom. I will be your moderator for this session. I will be monitoring the chat for you. I would like to ask that you go to the menti.com and use code 68053877 to engage with the presentation. And at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. India White, who will take us through her presentation. Thank you for joining, and please engage with us today.
Well, hi guys. Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to join you. It's super, just amazing conference so far. We had a great keynote. Thanks so much for tuning in to my session. We're going to have a lot of fun and some interaction here. So please go to menti.com and put in the code 68053877 and we'll get started. I'm going to now share my screen so that we can get started with the presentation. So I'm going to start presenting. And thanks, Flo, for definitely moderating the chat. Let's start our slideshow, and we will get to the Menti for sure. So we're going to talk today about the power of SEL and grit in the math classroom. Again, my name is Dr. India White. I'm so happy to be here with everyone. Let's get going. So a little bit about myself. I am a national education consultant. I'm a co-author for Big Ideas Learning. It's a math textbook company. I've been doing that for a little while now. And I'm also a motivational speaker. Recently, I was a TEDx speaker and an author. So I'm super excited to join you. I've been in the education world for 15 years and I love it. I have 2 children of my own. One in middle school and one in elementary schools. Today's session, we're going to talk about providing socio-emotional learning. One second, guys, because I'm trying to figure out how to move the bottom of my screen. And I think I'm clicking through the sessions. So give me 1 second. But today we're going to talk about socio-emotional learning and the supports of it in the classroom and whatnot. So bear with me as I go back a couple of screens, I think. I'm not sure where to, oh, okay. I'm trying to find the clicker for the slides to go back. If I don't know, Flo, if you're able to kind of assist me with this. Okay. Well, we're gonna
change your view option for a minute and see if change your view option to make your screen smaller. You should see the buttons on there.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason I'm not able to see the buttons, but it's okay because we're just gonna work at this. I don't know how to go backwards on my actual PowerPoint, so bear with me as I'm trying to figure out how to go back.
Sometimes the arrow keys will help.
Yeah, where are the arrow keys? Because I don't know where they are.
On your keyboard, maybe?
Yeah, I was trying the arrow keys and I don't see them on the actual presentation. So
try using your keyboard.
Yeah, if you use the keyboard, okay, it just got me out of the presentation altogether. So I think for some reason, I'm not able to see it. So I appreciate y'all's patience as I figure this out. We will figure this out. How about I just stop? Somehow I have to stop.
Oh, I see. Yeah, your Zoom is probably interfering with your PowerPoint.
It is. So, okay, I'm back at the beginning. Go Gators.
Yay.
I'm a graduate from UF and I'm grateful for that. Okay, now I'm back at the beginning. So again, we're talking about today the power of SEL and grit in the math classroom. You guys have been so patient. Thank you so much. Let's keep going. So again, a little bit about myself. I already told you guys I'm with Big Ideas Learning. I don't know why this screen down here, you can't see my information, but My Twitter handle is Indie Speak and Teach. I will write that in the chat for you so that you guys can, you know, take advantage of that later. So Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach, and I will also provide this PowerPoint presentation for you as well. Thank you. Okay, so you guys are seeing the screen. Great. All right. So again, the objective for today is we're trying to provide information to everyone on socio-emotional learning and grit and how it impacts education. We're also going to provide on how we could successfully implement socio-emotional learning and grit in the math classroom. Okay. And we're going to discuss what works in classrooms up to now, what has not worked, so that we know how we can best move forward. So of course, we know recently in the United States, we had a couple of different school shootings. We had Parkland, Uvalde, Virginia Tech. Unfortunately, we've had shootings as well outside of the classroom, as we are recently dealing with over in the California area and whatnot. And so we also have seen that there are suicide rates among youth have increased. Dropout rates have increased. Prison enrollment has increased all since the pandemic. So there is definitely a concern here. And so in the US, this is a sad reality and a sad statistic, but we have seen more than 200 mass shootings in the United States only in the year 2022. Okay, again, we have seen over 200 mass shootings since 2022 in the United States. That means we have had 4 shootings averaged in a week since 2022. We've had 2 million dropouts from the ages of 16 to 24, okay, since 2020 in our schools. Further, we're starting to see that there are triggers and reasons as to why student environment and safety has been threatened in the school environment. Students are starting to report higher increases of cyberbullying. There's been more student verbal abuse as well towards teachers since 2010. So the educational environment has changed. Our students need our help. There are real concerns here. We've seen that students of 2 or more races and students female that are female students in middle schools, they have expressed that they have undergone bullying at a higher rate than anything else since 2019 in our schools. Unfortunately, this has definitely triggered an increase in suicide rates of children. We've seen that. It's sad, guys, but suicide has now been the 2nd leading cause of death for children ages 15 through 24 in the United States. And we know some of these children have talked about, you know, just having a family history of suicide attempts or being exposed to violence, having impulsivity, aggressive, disruptive behavior, different things like this. They're having access to firearms, bullying, their feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, and more. These things are a reality in our school systems, and we need to stop and help our kids. Please feel free to chime in the chat anytime to share your thoughts, questions, so that we can have an interactive session. Thank you in advance. Now I want to talk to you guys also about the school to prison pipeline and teen incarceration. We've seen that in 2018, about 60% of white students were enrolled in college compared to 15% of Black students. We also saw that over 35% of Black students were enrolled in prison compared to 30% of white students. Data showed us that twice as many Black students went to prison instead of college, and 3 to 4 times as many white students went to college instead of prison, and more Hispanic students went to prison instead of enrolling in college. There's an issue with our students, and we need to help them. Now we know enough is enough. I don't know if these links will play. I would like to try to take a stab at one of these, and if it doesn't play, then I will definitely get back to the actual presentation. Can you guys still see my screen?
Yes. Be sure
Okay.
to check the box that says share sound when you share.
Okay. If this doesn't play, we will proceed and go back to the presentation. And if we can't hear it, then I will use closed caption so that we can read the. Okay, great.
We're not going to talk about basketball.
Can we hear?
It's, happened with our team.
Yes.
Yes.
So we're
So
going to
this-
start the same way tonight. Any basketball questions don't matter. Since we left shoot around, 14 children were killed 400 miles from here. And a teacher. And in the last 10 days, we've had elderly Black people killed in a supermarket in Buffalo. We've had Asian churchgoers killed in Southern California. And now we have children murdered at school. When are we going to do something? I'm tired. I'm so tired of getting up here and offering condolences to the devastated families that are out there. I'm so tired of the, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm tired of the moments of silence. Enough. There's 50 senators right now who refuse to.
And so this right here was simply a clip that is showing that society has now become so concerned that this has now infiltrated into entertainment, into the sports world. And as he said, when is enough enough? Our children need our support. So the question is, what can we as educators do to make a difference in the classroom? So this is why we talk about socio-emotional learning, because researcher Daniel Goleman, he spoke and said that SEL is a process of helping students to even adults as well, to develop fundamental skills for life effectiveness. It helps with relationships, it helps with our work, and it helps with us ethically, so that we can collaborate civilly together. It helps with skills, including recognizing and managing emotions, developing caring concerns for others, establishing positive relationships, making responsible decisions, handling challenging situations constructively and ethically. This really is helping students to care for each other and to be responsible and to be motivated. This is what socio-emotional learning is really all about. And so the data even shows us here that when you have SEL in school, or socio-emotional learning in schools, they did a meta-analysis of 82 based socio-emotional learning programs in 2017, right? And they found that the long-term effect, it improved 4 areas of instruction. That was skills of the students, socio-emotional learning skills, their attitudes, it improved positive social behaviors and academic performance. Further, it also found that there were decreases in conduct problems, emotional distress, and drug use, all when you have socio-emotional learning programs in our schools. Further, students were more self-aware and confident about learning capacities, and they tried harder to persist in face of challenges that they had in the classroom. So I think this is something that when it is implemented effectively, it's going to help classroom environments. So this we talk about the castle wheel, or the collaborative academic socio-emotional learning wheel, and how it impacts education. And so the 5 areas are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship building. And so I want to now ask a question to you guys that you can just put your answer in the chat. So how can you incorporate these elements to impact instruction in the classroom environment? So how could you incorporate socio-emotional learning, these 5 components of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship building and responsible decision making in your classroom so that it can impact your classroom environment. So I'm going to give you guys a moment to share, if you feel comfortable, to share in the chat these 5 components. How can you incorporate these into your class impact instruction? So how can we incorporate 5 elements to impact instruction through self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making? I like it. Flow, yes. So yes. Amanda said, prompt students to plan, offer options for assessments. Good. Prompting students to reflect on their own emotions and thinking prior to that and, after bursts of instruction. Fabulous. And thanks for sharing. And then also flows, mentioned sharing as well. And it's imperative to prompt students to reflect on their emotions. And I think that is critical because sometimes students are told, to be seen and not heard. Sometimes students are told, when an adult is in the room, you kind of mute yourself and you don't deal with that. Some genders are taught, you're not supposed to show expression. You're not supposed to cry and deal with that. So they have all those emotions bottled up in them. And, it could really kind of take a toll on them later on, unfortunately, right? And we start to see some of the impact of that. So thanks for sharing. For the sake of time, we will continue moving forward. So some examples, I had some situations of socio-emotional learning. I always share a story about an educator that I had myself when I was a pre-calculus student. I unfortunately had a very humble beginning. Some things took place, but when I was 16, I was kicked out of the house on Christmas Eve. And unfortunately, I was homeless my last 2 years of high school. But I was still taking pre-calculus class. And I remembered, during that time that I actually endured a loss of 4 family members, including my brother. And I remember my classmates, they didn't know what to say. My teacher was in shock as well. She was floored, but she didn't say anything. She was just there. And then I remembered returning after the funeral and everything. About 2 weeks later, we had final exams. And when I first got to my classroom, I remembered, my teacher had like this Post-it note, and it said, "Sorry for your loss." And, they had a little teddy bear there for me, and all my friends kind of contributed to that note. And I share that story because in that time, I was dealing with a world of emotions as as a student. And it makes me think of the students today that are dealing with so many real situations, and they have no one that can relate or have empathy and say it's going to be okay, and they don't understand what's going on. And so one thing teachers need to do is realize that sometimes you're going to have to be that helping hand for your student. You're going to have to be the one to tell your students it's going to be okay. We'll help you get through this and whatnot. And that's exactly what my teacher was able to do for me. And so I was able to bounce back in that situation because I had a classroom full of people that cared. And sometimes students need to know how much you care before they care about how much you know in your subject area of interest. And so I want to remind all of the educators on here that that is the most important thing, is building those relationships with students and really taking a dive into their real world and what they're going through. This leads me to talk about grit. So Dr. Angela Duckworth, in 2016, in her book, Grit, she defines grit as having passion and perseverance to obtain long-term goals. It's a predictor of success. It's been a significant predictor. She talked about students that were gritty and how, it was the main factor of success for first-generation students, and it really kind of replaced talent, because she said that if you have effort is greater than talent. And so any day of, any given day. And so long story short, she has a TED Talk here, and I would like to try to play this clip a little bit for you guys so you can hear what she had to say about grit. And I was inspired to follow her footsteps, and I was honored to also do a TED Talk on grit as well. But she is definitely my inspiration. All right, let's see this. Can we hear this?
When I was 27 years old, I left a very demanding job in
Yes.
management
Okay.
for a job that was even more demanding, teaching. I went to teach 7th graders math in the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests. I gave out homework assignments. When the work came back, I calculated grades. What struck me was that IQ was not the only difference between my best and my worst students. Some of my strongest performers did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking. Kinds of things you need to learn in 7th grade math. Sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not impossible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn the material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs? Who's going to earn the most money? In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon. Not a sprint. Studying grit in the Chicago schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure. Things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters. It's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out.
So that's a little bit about Dr. Angela Duckworth and her presentation on grit that she has shared with us. And so I'm going to now transition back to the PowerPoint. But as she said, and I also found the same research findings in my study on understanding persistence of first generation college scholarship recipients. I also found the main factor of success for these students. They had all types of factors. They had mentors, scholarships, you know, they had just being acclimated to that institution, but out of all of these factors, grit was it. So again, grit is it. Grit supported students during moments of discouragement. It supported kids that were, you know, even when they had friends that were quitting school. Other factors led to their success, as I mentioned before: talent, wealth, accommodations, but nothing trumped grit. So how can we now incorporate then socio-emotional learning and grit in the math classroom? Well, you can use lessons that are embedded with music, like a math musical, where you have math tied to the music, the content. Students can dance, students can learn those topics. You know, Big Ideas Learning has some of that. You can also have instructional delivery where your learners are connecting in the classroom through Kagan structures, Kahoot digital platforms, and more. You can have moments of metacognition where students are embracing their vulnerable state, and you're motivating them to persist beyond productive struggle. This is where grit kicks in, because students are so tempted to give up. But when you say, no, you've got it, you're almost there, I see what you're doing, I believe in you, you've got 5 more questions left, I know you can do this. And when you challenge them, that's what's going to really help them to really persist and to be successful in the classroom, no matter what. So you can also have goal setting. You can have timers for students for accountability and their success. You can implement PBIS or positive behavior intervention systems in the classroom, restorative practices. You can have high expectations like the ICU care work with Dr. Seda. You can have rewards that will stimulate intrinsic and motivate extrinsic motivation for your students. And of course, classroom systems are key for not only organization, but just for communication and for their success. I had some examples of grit, and I'll share one of a student who was an ESOL learner. He, was a student English language learner, and he was ranked number 7 in his class as a senior and didn't even know. His parents did not speak any English. And so we had to try to get this child into higher education because he wanted to go to college to be a lawyer. Because they didn't speak English, he had missed the cut when it came down to getting enrolled into a 4-year public institution. However, with grit, we were able to help that child get enrolled and to successfully sign up for community college. And now he's pursuing his aspirations to become a lawyer. So, but I can tell you, nobody knew how to help this child until we were able to really cultivate that grit in him. And so, now I want to hear from you guys. In what cases have you been effective at impacting grit levels in the classroom, in your school and your university? What has worked for you? How have you been able to help stimulate grit in your students so that they would not give up when they were discouraged? So feel free to chime in the chat. Oh, thanks, Amanda. So now, in the question, in case you forgot it or didn't hear it, in what cases have you been effective at impacting the grit levels of students in your classroom or in your school and your university? What worked for you? So how are you able to help students cultivate grit? And I'm just waiting. I know, as I mentioned, just making sure that we are doing our best to just continue to stimulate their interest and motivate them. And so with that said, I appreciate you guys sharing out, and I appreciate you being a part of my session. In conclusion, let's continue to do what's right for our babies because they're counting on you. Now, here's my information for you guys. So let's connect. I will also share with you in a minute the Mentimeter results, but you can reach me at iwhite@larsontext.com for my Big Ideas Learning email, or my personal email is india.white.123@gmail.com. You can check out my website at www.india-white.com. And there's my Twitter at Indie Speak and Teach. LinkedIn is the India White. And here are some of our results from our question on Mentimeter. So, how does SEL and grit impact growth in the mindset or growth mindset in the classroom? And you guys are correct. So thanks so much again for a fabulous session. And that's all I have for you today. So have a great day. Again, thanks for having me on this platform.
Thank you so much, Dr. White, for sharing your insight with us and giving us some ideas of how we too can engage in SEL and grit, whatever we are doing. For those of you in the room, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them at this time, or to just take some time to reflect on what you have learned and how you will incorporate it into your practice. At this time, I just want to thank you again for attending the session. Remember to give us our session evaluation. India has placed some of our information in the chat for you, so you can grab that. I am going to now turn over to our room manager, Dr. Amanda Major. Over to you, Amanda.